Good evening. Welcome. Oh, sorry. Welcome to the stream. My name is Spook. Or at least the channel says so. Willkommen, willkommen. Hope you're all doing fine. Yes. Today we're gonna continue with our reading adventure of Spice and Wolf. Or reading, more like reading the adventure of Spice and Wolf. I know the wolf is, so who's the spice? Ah. Yes. Hope you're all doing fine. I'm doing alright. It was a busy weekend. Did a lot of stuff. Tried my best on singing. As you may have noticed. Post a new cover of King because people kept asking me, like, oh, where is the King cover? And I'm like, here is the King cover. Ah, well, it's. I tried my best. Probably could have done a better job, but it was meant as a meme anyway. I never know meant it to, yeah, do it so seriously. But I'll do, if people want, I'll do another song and I'll take it seriously. Hmm. Times like these, I wish I had the YouTube poll function. Basically, throw out a community post like, which song shall I cover next? Oh, oh well. Doesn't really matter. Yes. Well, it's past 8. So I should probably get a move on. Yes. Let me switch screen. Hopefully this works. On to reading. No, it doesn't because screen's covered. No, it does. There we go. Can throw this one in a bit. Yes. 6 volumes, alright. Let me know if it's too loud. Alright. Get my glasses. Le glace. Oui. Oh, I should have done this beforehand. I hate dirty glasses. Really with a passion. Damn, it's warm here. Right, that should be better. So, without further ado, let's start the adventure of Spice And Wolf. I'm sorry, I'll never do that again. Okay. Chapter 2. The rolling hills ended, replaced by undulations in the landscape that barely rated the term, which made it easy for traveling. Which made for easy traveling. Lawrence hadn't yet shaken the effects of the previous night's wine, so the easy road suited him just fine. With a companion to partake in the fine wine and food, he had overindulged. If he'd had if he'd had to navigate the mountain trail in his current state, he would likely have stumbled straight into the bottom of a valley. But there, but here there wasn't so much as a river, let alone a valley, so Lawrence could safely leave the horse to simply follow the road. Occasionally, he would nod off for a brief moment, and in the wagon bed, Hollow was sound asleep, snoring away without a care in the world. Every time Lawrence startled awake, he thanked God for such peaceful times. After passing many quiet hours this way, Hollow finally stirred herself awake, just past noon. She rubbed her eyes, her still clearly bearing. She rubbed her eyes, her face still clearly bearing the marks of whatever she had slept against. She hauled herself up to the driver's seat and gulped some water from the water skin, a blank expression on her face. Happily, she did not seem hungover. Had she been, Lawrence might have had to stop the wagon. Otherwise, she might wind up vomiting in the wagon bed, an outcome that didn't bear thinking about. "'Tis good weather today," said Hollow. "It is." The two exchanged lazy pleasantries, then both yawned hugely. The road that they were on was one of the major northbound trade routes, so they encountered many other travelers while following it. Among them were merchants flying flags of countries so far away that Lawrence only knew them from the import receipts. Hollow saw the flags and seemed to think they were simply advertising the merchant's home country, but generally the small flags were displayed so that the merchants from same nation could identify a fellow countryman should he pass. Generally, such encounters would give way to exchange of news from the old country. Arriving in a foreign land where the language, food, and dress were all different could leave even a constantly traveling merchant to homesickness. Lawrence explained this to Holo, who then gazed the small flags of the passing merchants in deep thoughts. Holo had left her homeland hundreds of years ago, and the desire to speak to someone from her birthplace was stronger than any traveling merchant's homesickness. "Ah, well, I'll be back soon enough, eh?" she declared with a smile. But there was a touch of loneliness in it. It seemed to think Lawrence. It seemed to Lawrence that he should have some response to this, but none came to mind. As he drove the horse along the road, the afternoon sun made the made the thought hazy in his mind. There was nothing finer than warm sunlight in the cool season, but the stillness was soon shattered. Just as Lawrence and Holo started to doze off in the driver's seat, Holo spoke abruptly. "Hey!" "There's a group of people. What do you say?" Lawrence asked as he scrambled to grab the reins in his sleepiness. His sleepiness gone in an instant. He narrowed his eyes and looked ahead into the distance. Despite the slight undulation in the road, the generally flat terrain offered a good view ahead. But Lawrence saw nothing. He looked to Holo, who now stood staring forward intently. They are certainly there. I wonder what happened. Are they carrying weapons? There were only a few ways to explain a group of people on the trade route. Lawrence hoped for a large caravan of merchants, a column of pilgrims all visiting the same destination, or a member of nobility visiting a foreign country. But there were other less pleasant possibilities. They could be bandits, rogues, hungry soldiers returning home, or mercenaries. Encountering returning soldiers or mercenaries might mean giving up on everything he owned, if he was lucky. His life could well be forfeit. What would happen to his female companion went without saying. I do not see any weapons. They don't seem to be annoying soldiers at any rate. You've encountered soldiers? Asked Lawrence, slightly surprised. They had long, sharp spears, which made them quite a bother, though they couldn't keep up with my wits, Holos said so proudly that Lawrence didn't venture to ask what happened to the unlucky mercenaries. There's no doubt about it, yes? Holo looked around quickly, then pulled her hood back and exposed her wolf ears. Her pointed ears were the same brown as her tail, and her tail were the same brown as her tail, and like her tail, they expressed her mood so effectively that they were a good way to tell when she was, for example, lying. Those same ears pricked forward intently. Holo's attitude was every inch of the wolf searching out for its prey. Lawrence had encountered such a wolf once before. It had been a dark, windy night. Lawrence had been following a road across a plain, and by the time he heard the first howl, he was already within the wolf's territory. Baying sounded from every direction. When he realized he was surrounded and the horse that pulled the wagon was half mad with fear, just then Lawrence caught sight of a single wolf. Its posture was fearless and looked straight at Lawrence. Its ears so keenly fixed upon him that he was sure he could hear him breathe. He had known that forcing his way free from the wolf's snare would be impossible, so he immediately took out a leather bag and making sure the wolf could see him, he dumped all the meat and bread and other provisions he had onto the ground. Then he urged his horse forward, the wolf watching him all the while. He could feel the beast's gaze on his back for some time, but eventually the howls seemed to cluster around the food he had dropped, and he escaped unscathed. Lawrence would never forget that wolf, and at this moment Holo looked just like it. It seems there's some kind of to-do, said Holo, bringing Lawrence out of his reverie. He shook his head to clear it. Is there a market I've forgotten about? Said Lawrence, roadside meetings to exchange information and advance were not unheard of. I wonder. It doesn't smell of a fight, that's for sure. Holo pulled her hood back over her head and sat down. Lawrence was preoccupied with driving the cart as she regarded him with an expression that said, "So what shall we do?" The merchant was deep in thought as he visualized a map of the area. Lawrence knew he had to get the arms in his wagon bed to the church of the city of Ruvenhagen. He had signed a contract to that effect with a company in Ruvenhagen. If he detoured now, he would have to backtrack along a very roundabout route. The only other roads were so poor as to be passable only on foot. You don't smell any blood, do you? Asked Lawrence. Hollow shook her head decisively. Let's go then. A detour's a bit too far. And even if they should be mercenaries, you have me, said Hollow, pulling out her leather pouch filled with the wheat that hung from her neck. A better bodyguard didn't exist. Lawrence smiled trustingly as he drove the horse towards down the road. So, to detour around here, take the path of Saint Line? No, it's surely shorter to take the road that crosses the plains to Midsheim. Anyways, is that talk about the merchant band true? Buy his cloth, won't you? I'll take the salt in exchange. Anyone here speak Prussian? I think this guy's got a problem. Lawrence and Hollow caught snatches of the conversation as they reached the throng of people. Some of the people stopped in the road were recognizable at a glance as merchants. Others were artisans from different lands on a pilgrimage to improve their skills. Some walked, others traveled by wagon or carriage. Some led donkeys loaded with bundles of straw. Conversation was everywhere, and those who didn't have a common language gesticulated wildly in efforts to make themselves understood. Getting into a confrontation because of a language barrier is a terrifyingly unforgettable experience. All the more so when you happen to be carrying your entire fortune with you. Sadly, Lawrence didn't understand the man either. He empathized, but there was nothing he could do. And he didn't know what the precise problem was anyway. Lawrence glanced at Hollow, a sign that she should stay quietly sitting in the driver's seat, and hopped out of the wagon, hailing all nearby merchants. Excuse me. Oh, a fellow traveler. Have you just arrived? Yes, from Proson. But what's going on here? Surely the local earl hasn't decided to open market here? Ah, nay. Were that so, we'd all have our mats spread on the ground, and trading the day away. In truth, there's tell of a mercenary band crossing the road to Ruvenhagen, so we're all stopped here. The merchant wore a turban and a loose baggy pants. The man had a heavy mantle wrapped around his neck and a large knapsack slung over his back. Judging by his heavy clothes, the merchant frequented the heart of the Northlands. The dust of the road lingered on his snow-burdened face. The many wrinkles and the tanned leather pallor of his skin were proof of a long life as a traveling merchant. A mercenary band? I know General Rastuel's group patrols these parts. No, they were flying crimson flags, with a hawk device upon them. Lawrence knitted a brow. The Heinsberg mercenary band? Oh no, I see. Oh, I see you've traveled the Northlands. Indeed, they say it's the Hawks of Heinsberg. I'd sooner run into bandits than them when carrying a full load of goods. It was said that the Hawks of Heinsberg were so hungry for wealth that whenever they passed not so much as a single turnip leaf, when they passed, not a single turnip leaf would be left behind. If they thought it could be sold. They had made their name in the Northlands, and if they were on the road ahead, trying to pass it would be suicidal. The Heinsberg mercenaries were reputed to be to spot their prey faster than a hawk on their wing, than the hawk on the wing. They would they would be upon a lazily traveling merchant in an instant, surely. However, mercenaries acted purely out of self-interest, and in that sense, they were not far from merchants. Essentially, when they behaved strangely, there was often a similar unexpected uh, something similarly unexpected happening in the marketplace. For example, a sharp jump in or drop in the price of goods. Being a merchant, Lawrence was naturally pessimistic, but pessimism would get him nowhere. He knew he was already on the road loaded with goods. All that mattered now was how he would get to Ruvenhagen. So it seems taking a detour is the only course, said Lawrence. Most probably. Apparently there's a new road to Ruvenhagen that heads off to the road of Kaslata. But it's been on the unsafe side lately, I hear. Lawrence had not been to the region for half a year, so this was the first he had heard of the new road. He seemed to recall that on the north side of the plains, that stretched out, there was an eerie forest. It was the source of constant unpleasant rumors. Unsafe? He asked. How? Well, there have always been wolves in the plains, but it's been especially bad lately. They say there's a story going around that an entire caravan was taken 2 weeks ago, and the wolves were summoned by a pagan sorcerer. Lawrence then remembered that the unpleasant rumors were mainly of wolves. He realized Hollow was probably listening in on this conversation and stole a glance at her. A smile danced around the corners of her mouth. How do you get to this new road? Huh, you're going you're going to go? You're quite a rash one, aren't you? Take this road straight and then turn right when it forks. Keep going for quite a while, and then it will split again. And you bear left, though peacefully willing away 2 or 3 days here, should be alright. I'd take It'd take but 5 minutes to tell if the mercenaries really are there, but by the time you saw them, it'd be too late. The merchants the merchants with fish or meat will have to head to a different city, but I'll play it safe. Lawrence nodded and looked back to the contents of his own wagon. Fortunately, his cargo was in no danger of spoiling, but he still wanted to sell it in Ruvenhagen. He pondered silently for a moment, then gave his thanks to the other merchant and returned to the wagon. Hollow had behaved herself, but once Lawrence sat down in the driver's seat, she started giggling. Summoned, eh? So, what is the wise wolf's take on this? Hmm. The wolves in the plains. Lawrence clarified as he took the reins and mulled over the question at hand. To go or not to go? Sniffed Hollow, idly biting on her fingernail with a sharp fang. I think they'd be more interesting than humans. At the least, we'll be able to talk. It was a good joke. That decides it then? That decided. That decides it. Then Lawrence flicked the reins and turned the wagon around, heading down the road and away from the chattering merchants. A few of them raised their voice in surprise, but most of simply took off their hats or capes and waved. Good luck, their gesture said. Sorry about that, very loud. there was no there was no merchant that would shy away from a dangerous bridge. If across that dangerous bridge awaited a large profit. The news of a mercenary band traveling the roads would spread faster than a plague. Such was the threat that they posed. But for a merchant, time was an indispensable tool. Wasting it had always led to loss. This is why Lawrence decided that with Holo along, he would risk traveling the plains despite the rumors of wolves. The stories of a nearby mercenary band would surely have an impact on the Ruvenhagen market, and Lawrence meant to take advantage of that to make a nice bit of pocket money. At first, he jumped to the assumption that things had taken a turn for the worse, but in reality, it was just the opposite. And in any case, unexpected developments were part of the parcel, were part and parcel of the life of a traveling merchant. That's what made it fun. You certainly seem happy, remarked the bemused Hollow. I suppose, was Lawrence's short reply. The road ahead led to profit, the watchword of the traveling merchant. They arrived at the plains in question before noon the next day. There, there were times when a new trade route naturally occurred, and other times when the powers that be in the region created them. Sometimes grass was cleared to make a road, but in extreme cases gravel would be laid, and then topped with wooden planks, allowing carts to cross the terrain at relatively high speeds. Such roads did not come cheaply, of course, and tolls to use them were high, but since robbers along these roads were dealt with harshly, the price was good value for in terms of safety. The road ahead, with the rumors of wolf appearance, was somewhere between the two types. A sign that had been erected indicated the destination of the road that now branched off. There, at the fork, was a pile of weather-beaten planks, as if there had once been a plan to build something at this junction. Perhaps the builders had intended to collect a toll to maintain the road well, but now all that remained was the one lonely sign. The junction sat atop a small hill, and from its crest one could see down the road as far as one cared to. This seemed to be a good spot for lunch. Despite the approaching winter, the grass was still quite green, and Lawrence could look out across the plains that he would have rushed to pasture. That he would have to rush to pasture his sheep upon where he is shepherd. That sentence destroyed me. All that was left of the road that was cut through the plains was a pair of wagon tracks, mostly overgrown with grass. Naturally, there had been no other travelers. According to Lawrence's mental map, the forest to the north of this road was the most suitable spot for wolves to make their home. But it was hardly true that all wolves lived in the forest. In the distance stood patches of tall grass, and this looked more like an ideal plain for wolves. Lawrence could guess that much without asking Holo, but he went ahead and consulted her anyway. do you think? Any wolves about? Holo was in a process of devouring a piece of dried mutton. Who was in okay, gave Lawrence a exasperated look. We wolves are hardly so foolish as to be spotted from a place with such a good vantage, she said, sniffing with disdain. Her fangs occasionally showed as she chewed the meat, revealing her non-human nature. Holo's statement and her fangs brought her essential wolf nature to the forefront of Lawrence's mind, and he considered her complications. If they did if they did encounter wolves, the situation would become problematic. It should be well, though. Should we happen into a pack, we'll just throw them some jerky. We wolves don't get into pointless fights after all. Lawrence nodded and snapped the reins to start across the plains. The gentle breeze smelled faintly of wild beasts. Lawrence murmured a quiet prayer for safe travels. A Faram silver piece? Nope, it's a counterfeit marine. Wait, was not the counterfeit marine this one? No, that's a piece of late radion Bishoffrey silver. Holo fell silent, holding certain silver pieces in her hand. Lawrence was teaching her the names. Oh, there's two. Lawrence was teaching her the names of various currencies as a way to combat boredom. But even Holo the Wise Wolf struggled with coins whose size and design were so similar. Well, you'll pick up on it if you use them, no doubt, said Lawrence. Holo was so serious that Lawrence was afraid to tease her, but his effort to be considerate only seemed to hurt her pride even more. She glared up at him, her ears flicking angry under her hood. Once more, then, she said. All right, from the top. Trenny silver, Fitting silver, Ryut silver, Fake marine silver, Faram silver, Bald King Landbart silver, Mitzving temple silver, Fake Mitzving temple silver, Saint Mitzving silver, Mitzving mass silver, and this one is... Oh, wait now! Lawrence looked up at Holo's palm, where he'd been pointing at various coins. Her expression was complicated, angry, and on the verge of tears. You're making a sport of me, she said. Lawrence remembered accusing his own teacher of the same thing when he had to learn the names of all the different currencies. So without thinking, he laughed. Holo growled and flashed her fangs, and Lawrence quickly composed himself. The Mitzving diocese in particular issues a lot of coin. I'm not teasing you, truly. Then don't laugh, Holo grumbled, looking back down at the coins. Lawrence couldn't help himself but smile. Anyway, Holo continued, why are there so many coins? It seemed to be such a bother. They're made when a new nation is established or collapsed. A powerful regional lord or church can issue a coin and, of course, there's no end to counterfeiting. Even the Ryut silver started out as a fake trenny piece, but it was so widely used that it became an independent currency. But when pelts were used, you always knew what you were dealing with, said Holo, sniffing, then finally heaving a sigh of irritation. She might be able to tell the coins apart by scent, but Lawrence didn't know how serious she was about it. Still, it's a good way to kill the time, eh? He offered. Without so much as a smile, Hollow thrust the collection of coins back at Lawrence's hands. Enough, 'tis time for a nap. Hollow stood, ignoring Lawrence's pained smile. He spoke to her as she made her way to the wagon bed. Even napping you'll know if wolves come near? Of course I shall. It'll be a hassle if we're surrounded. To be cornered by mercenaries or bandits was, of course, troubling, but at least they could be reasoned with. Wolves, on the other hand, cared little for human words. One never knew what might cause them to attack. Even with Hollow at his side, Lawrence was uneasy. Your worry is excessively, said Hollow, turning around with a grin, perhaps sensing his concern. Most animals are quite aware they be sleeping or awake. It is only you humans who are defenseless in slumber. You'd be more convincing if you snored less. Hollow's face hardened at Lawrence's words. I do not snore. Oh, it's not too loud, I suppose, admitted Lawrence. He found her snoring rather charming, but the furrows in Hollow's brows only deepened. I do not snore, I say. Fine, fine, said Lawrence, chuckling, but Hollow came back up to the driver's seat and leaned close to him. I do not. Fine, fine, all right. Hollow seemed to consider this a question of honor, and Lawrence found her sharp expression irritating. She had constantly gotten the best of him since they'd met, and he realized he was generally used for her treatment. Generally used to her treatment. She seemed to have nothing more to say. Her expression sour, she turned her back on Lawrence unceremoniously. Still, there really doesn't seem to be anyone around, murmured Lawrence casually, smiling to himself at Hollow's antics. In truth, there wasn't a single soul on the expansive plain, as far as the eye could see. Even given the rumors of wolves, Lawrence would have expected a few people to be taking the shortcut to Rovenhagen. But when he looked back, there was no one to be seen. Rumors are powerful force, said Hollow. Sorry. Even when her back was suddenly turned, her way of carrying on the conversation was amusing, and Lawrence chuckled in spite of himself. True enough, he said with a nod. Though it's not quite true that there's no one about, said Hollow, her tone slightly different now, and her tail switching restlessly underneath her robe. Then she sighed, bored. So far, Hollow had tended to her tail without alarming the merchants. They passed on the road. When Lawrence saw her now deliberately hide it away, he pondered why, and soon had his answer. I smell sheep. I smell sheep. There will be a shepherd ahead. I so hate shepherds. If there were sheep on the plains, then there would be shepherds as well. Shepherds were legendary for their ability to detect wolves, and Hollow must have known this. Her small nose wrinkled when she spoke of them, making her distaste entirely evident. Shepherds and wolves were natural enemies, but as merchants and wolves were almost basically antagonistic, Lawrence kept silent at that point. Shall we detour? Nay, It's them who should run from us. There's no need for us to move aside. Lawrence found himself chuckling at Hollow's displeasure. She glared at him but pretended not to notice and looked elsewhere. Well, if you say so, we'll stay the course. The field suit our wagon quite well. Hollow nodded silently. As Lawrence took up the reins, the wagon traveled along the thin road through the plains. And at length, white dots that might have been sheep became visible in the distance. Hollow's irritated expression remained. Lawrence noticed that he stole a glance at her, and the sharp-eyed wolf girl seemed to notice. She sniffed, twisting her lip. I've despised shepherds longer than you've been alive. Getting along with them now is impossible, she said, sighing as she looked down. There's all that delicious meat just walking about, but imagine having to look at it, never tasting it. You'd hate them too, would you not? Her somber tone was amusing, but it was clear that she was in fact very serious. So Lawrence made an effort to keep a straight face as he looked ahead. They had now gotten close enough to the flock of sheep that Lawrence could tell one from another. The sheep were grouped closely together, so it was hard to be sure of the precise number. But it was a score, certainly, that roamed lazily across the grass, chewing away placidly. Of course, it was not only one sheep on the plains. Hollow's nemesis, not only sheep on the plains, Hollow's nemesis, the shepherd, was there as well, accompanied by a sheepdog. The shepherd wore a robe the color of dry grass, and he had a horn fixed at the waist with a mist grey sash. He also carried a staff longer than he was tall, with a palm-sized bell affixed at the top. A black-furred sheepdog paced to and fro from his about his master. To and from about his master, as if keeping guard. Its long fur made it seem like a tongue of black flame, as it sprinted across the plains. It was said that there were two things travelers needed to be careful of when encountering a shepherd on their travels. The first was not to offend the shepherd, the second was to make sure the shepherd's robes did not conceal a demon. The shepherds who wandered the vast plains with naught but sheepdogs for a company evoked such strange warnings because their lives were even lonelier than those of traveling merchants. They were often seen as nearly inhuman, leading their flocks across the plains, controlling the animals with nothing but a staff and a horn in hand. It was easy to imagine the shepherds as some kind of pagan sorcerers. Some said that meeting a shepherd while traveling ensured protection from accidents for a week, thanks to the spirits of the land. Others said that shepherds were demons in disguise, and if you let your guard down, they would imprison your soul within one of the sheep they tended. For his part, Lawrence found nothing strange in these beliefs. Shepherds were mysterious enough to warrant such ideas. He raised his hand and waved it thrice in a way that had become a ritual for greeting shepherds. And he was relieved to see the shepherd raise and lower his staff 4 times in traditional fashion. At the very least, this shepherd was not a ghost. This first barrier had been cleared, but the real test would come when he got closer and would ascertain whether or not the shepherd was a demon in disguise. "I'm Lawrence, a traveling merchant. And this is my companion Hollow," declared Lawrence by way of introduction, once he got close enough to make out the patchwork on the shepherd's cloak and brought his horse to a stop. The shepherd was rather small for his stature, a bit taller than Hollow. While Lawrence talked, the dog that had been rounding up the sheep came rolling over to its master. Sitting beside the shepherd was like a faithful knight. Grey eyes tinged with blue steadily scrutinized Lawrence and Hollow. The shepherd was silent. "I have come by this road and met you by the grace of God, and if you are a good shepherd and true, you'll be well met. A true shepherd would be able to prove himself with a traditional hymn and dance of his kind." The shepherd nodded slowly and planted his staff directly in front of him. Lawrence found himself surprised at the shepherd's small, slender hand, but was even more surprised what came next. "By the blessings of God in the heavens." The voice that intoned the shepherd's hymn was that of a young girl. "By protection of the spirits of the land." Moving her staff with skill, the shepherd drew an arrow in the dirt with a practiced ease. Starting from the tip of the arrow, inscribed a circle around herself counterclockwise. "The word of God is carried on the wind, and the blessing of the spirits of the land inhabit in every grass eaten by lamb." Once her circle reached the tip of the arrow, she began to stamp her feet on the earth. The lambs are led by the shepherd, and the shepherd by God." Finally, she held her staff still, aligned with the tip of the arrow by the earth. "By the grace of God, the shepherd follows the path of the righteousness." No matter the country, the shepherd's hymn was always the same. It was not the habit of shepherds to associate the way craftsmen or merchants did, but it was no exaggeration to say that the hymn and its dance were universal. It was enough to lend credence to the idea that shepherds could converse across great distance by sending words on the wind. "My apologies for doubting you. You were surely a shepherdess," said Lawrence as he climbed down from the wagon. The shepherd girl's mouth smirked with a smile. Her hood still obscured much of her face, so it was difficult to be sure, but from what was visible, she was a beauty. Even as he remained a gentleman, Lawrence was filled with curiosity. Female merchants were rare, but shepherdesses were even rarer. Given that she was also a fetching young lass, a curious merchant could hardly fail to be interested. However, merchants are completely hopeless at anything outside of mercantile world. Lawrence was a fine example of this. Unable to find a topic of conversation beyond their encounter on the road, he suppressed his curiosity and stuck only to the most standard greetings. Having met you by the grace of God, I would have you pray for our safe travels, shepherdess. With pleasure. At the sound of the girl's voice, calm as the grazing sheep, Lawrence's curiosity grew larger than the summer cloud. He didn't show it, but It was only with effort that he kept his inquisitiveness hidden. It was not his nature to ask shamelessly personal questions, nor did his nature grant him any gift of smooth talk. As he approached the shepherdess to receive the prayer, he thought of Weiss, the money changer in Pazio. He envied him his ways with women, his easy way with women. Adding to that Holo was sitting in the wagon. Holo, who hated all shepherds, somehow the last fact was the weightiest reason for stifling his curiosity. As Lawrence considered this, the shepherdess held her staff high. Uh, Staff high. To give the prayer for safe travel that had been requested of her. Halti mis tuero lespinzio tirato cul. The ancient words from scripture used by shepherds in every country, no matter what language, retained their mysterious quality, no matter how many times Lawrence had heard them. Shepherds did not know the true meaning of these words, but when praying for safe travels, they always used the same ones, as if by some ancient agreement. The way in which the shepherdess lowered her staff and blew a note on her horn was also thus. Lawrence gave his thanks for the prayer of safety and produced a brown copper coin. Copper, rather than gold or silver, was a customary token of thanks for shepherds. And it was also traditional for shepherds to not refuse the token. The girl extended her hand just slightly larger than Hollow's, and Lawrence thanked her again as he placed the coin in her palm. Unable to find any reason to continue his conversation with her, Lawrence reluctantly gave up. Well then, he said, taking his leave, though his feet were slow to move as he tried to return to the wagon. Unexpectedly, it was the shepherdess who spoke next. Are you perchance bound for Reuvenhagen? Her clear voice was different from Holo's, and it was hard to imagine that she could be counted among those who chose the harsh life of a shepherd. Lawrence glanced over his shoulder at Holo, who looked off in a different direction. She seemed quite bored. Yes, we're here on our way from Proson. How do you come to hear of this path? It's the pilgrimage road to Saint Metrogius. Of Saint Metrogius. We heard of it just the other day. Ah, I see. Have you heard about the wolves then? With these words, Lawrence understood why the girl had gone through the trouble of starting a conversation. She no doubt took Lawrence for a simple merchant who had chosen this route without any information. I have indeed, but I'm in a hurry, so I decided to take the risk. There was no need to explain about Holo. For enough profit, any merchant would risk a wolf-infested road, so there was no reason for suspicion. But the shepherdess' reaction was strange. She seemed almost disappointed. I see, she muttered quietly, her shoulders slumping. She had been hoping for something, but what? Lawrence mulled the conversation over. There were not many possibilities. Either she had hoped he didn't know about the wolves, or she was in no hurry. That was all he could guess from their brief exchange. Is something the matter? Were he not to ask the girl her troubles were? Were you not to ask the girl what her troubles were, it would be his failing not as a merchant but as a man. He put his most gentlemanly manner and gave a businesslike smile. Behind him, Holo was probably quite irritated by now, but he put the thought out of his mind. Well, that is. Anything at all? Is there something you need? When it came to negotiating, Lawrence was in his element. Selling her something would let him find more about this rare female shepherd. Even if fairies were more common, of course, were more common. Of course, behind his smile, he was trying to work out what exactly he could sell her. But with her next word, such thoughts evaporated. Well, I was wondering if you mightn't hire me? Faced with the shepherdess looking up at him as she held, no, clung to her staff, Lauren's mind raced. When a shepherd asked to be hired, it was the equivalent of being asked if you would leave your sheep in their care. But Lawrence had no sheep. What what he did was what he did have was a single clever, cheeky wolf. Well, as you can see, I'm a merchant. I don't trade in sheep. I'm sorry, but oh no, no, not that. Flustered, the girl waved her hands hastily, then gazed from side to side to buy herself some time. Her head was deep in thought, and was deep enough in the hood that her gaze wasn't visible. But it was clear that she was looking for something. Perhaps was a tool. That something was a tool that would help her explain her request. Soon it seemed as if she had found it. From underneath her hood, somehow communicated a sense of relief. Almost as if she had expressive ears behind, hidden under there, like Holo. What the shepherd girl was looking for sat alertly beside her, a four-legged portrait of a faithful knight, executed in black fur, her sheepdog. I'm a shepherd. I tend to my flock, but I can also drive off wolves. As she spoke, she waved her right hand slightly, and the black dog stood at attention. If you'll be so good to hire me, I can protect you from you and your companion from wolves. Would you consider it? As if to punctuate his mistress's clumsy sales pitch, the dog barked once, then dashed off to round up the flock, which was beginning to disperse. Though knights or mercenaries were often hired as protection on dangerous roads, Lawrence had never heard of hiring a shepherd to drive off wolves. But now that he thought about it, having a shepherd at your side would give you a keen set of eyes and ears. He'd never heard of such an agreement, though because shepherds that would purpose such thing were non-existent. Lawrence looked at the dog as it rounded up the sheep, as if practicing for possible wolf attacks. Then it turned back towards the girl. Living the lonely life of a shepherd, she made no occasion to give a fake, ingratiating grin. Under the hood, she smiled awkwardly. Lawrence thought for a moment, then spoke. Wait a moment, if you would. I'll consult with my companion. Thank you. For his part, Lawrence was ready to hire the girl unconditionally, but hiring the shepherdess meant paying her money, and whenever money was involved, a merchant could think of nothing beyond the possible losses and gains. Lawrence trotted back to the wagon bed and raised his voice to Hollow, who lounged there, looking bored. If he wanted to know about the shepherd's ability to repel wolves, he thought his best bet would be to ask the nearest wolf. What do you think of the shepherdess? Hmm? Hmm. Hollow rubbed her eyes lazily and looked at the girl. Lawrence did likewise. The shepherdess did not return their gaze as she gave orders to her dog. She didn't seem to be trying to show off her skills. She was merely rounding up the scattered sheep. Sheep, after all, tended to disperse when they stopped to graze and came closer together when forced to walk. Oh, yes. There we are. Hollow turned away from the girl and spoke irritably. I'm far more fetching. The horse neighed as if chuckling. No, not. Um, I'm. I meant her skills. Skills? What can you tell of her as a shepherd? If she's good, she might be worth hiring. You heard her, surely. Surely. Hollow glanced at the girl, then gave Lawrence a bitter glare. You already have me, don't you? Of course, but it never occurred to me to use a shepherd to drive off wolves. There could be new business in it. Hollow the wise wolf could tell when a person was lying. Despite the truth of Lawrence's statement, she still regarded him with suspicious eyes. Lawrence soon understood why. I'm not being blinded by charm. You're the fairer, after all, he said, shrugging his shoulders as if to add, okay. I suppose that's a passing mark, came the reply. It was a bit harsh, being graded like that, but Hollow smiled pleasantly, so surely it was a joke. So what of her skill? Hollow's face was instantly tense again. I cannot say for certain without seeing her in action, but I suppose she'll be in the top half. Can you be a bit more concrete? I could take a sheep for her, from her. However, normal wolves would be dealt with if they attacked even if they attacked all together. It was unexpectedly high appraisal. Her treatment of the sheep was very proficient. The worst shepherds are the ones with clever dogs who know how to cooperate with them. That one does both. I dare say her voice suggests that she's young, which makes it even worse. Before she gets any more dangerous, I've I have a mind to. All right, thanks. Lawrence wasn't sure whether Hollow was joking or not, but the switching of her tail suggested she was half serious. It was enough to know that the shepherdess was a good one. If he just provisionally hired her, it would still cost money, which would be a waste if she turned out to be clumsy. Lawrence turned to approach the girl, but was stopped short by Hollow speaking up. Hey! Yes? Are you really going to hire that? Hollow's voice had an accusing tone. Lawrence heard her and remembered that Hollow had no love for shepherds. You hate her that much? Well, as long as you're asking, no, I don't care for shepherds, but that's not what I meant. I'm talking about you. This is this was the very definition of being caught off guard. Excuse me? Asked Lawrence with all sincerity, having no idea what Hollow meant. Hollow sighed in irritation and narrowed her eyes. Her red-tinged amber irises were keen, burning with a cold fire. If you're going to hire her, that means she'll be traveling with us for a time. I'm asking you, uh, I'm asking you if you have no problem with that. Hollow's eyes were fixed coolly in their gaze. She sat in the wagon bed and thus looked down on him. That wasn't necessarily why, but Lawrence couldn't shake the feeling that she was very angry with him. Lawrence frantically thought it through. Hollow was furious at him because he was going to hire a shepherd. If it wasn't because she hated shepherd, then there were not many other possibilities he could imagine. The options disappeared one after another, leaving only one. Hollow perhaps preferred traveling as a pair, just the two of them. You don't like it? I didn't say that, came her quick, sulky reply, musing fondly on the peevish side of Hollow's. Lawrence smiled slightly as he spoke. It's about 2 days to Ruvenhagen, no? No good? Nor did I say that, she said, shooting him a glance that he couldn't help but find charming. Well, in that case, I'm sorry, but I have to impose upon your patience, he said. He smiled openly, unable to resist Hollow's unexpected charm. Hollow knitted her brow. What exactly am I going to endure, then? She asked. Well, said Lawrence, hesitating. He couldn't very well suggest that she was jealous to her face. Once Hollow's contrariness was roused, her opposition would be tireless. I'd like to see how effective a shepherd is against wolves. You can manage for 2 days, can't you? 'Tis not impossible, but that's not the issue. Well, Lawrence began, concerned about the shepherdess, but Hollow took the opportunity to continue. If we travel carelessly with someone else, they might find out about me, might they not? And I could manage, eh? But what about you? In those words, Lawrence heard something that made him stiffen. It was not his imagination, nor was it some grandiose thing, and even the shepherdess some distance away cocked her head as she looked on. Of course, that was it. That was the other possibility. How had he overlooked it? He wished the sudden cold sweat that broke out all over him would wash away his mistake. Thinking that Hollow wanted to travel alone with him had distracted him from the obvious. He had been presumptuous. Hollow's gaze bored into the back of his head. The change in Lawrence's demeanor was obvious even from a distance, and the ancient wise wolf was sitting next to him, surely discerning his inner workings. Oh, I see how it is. I see how it is. Lawrence reddened. You wanted me to say something like this, He turned slowly back to her, facing the wolf girl with a expression that was downright desolate. Hollow put a closed hand to her mouth and spoke with a hesitant, modest tone. I just want to travel with you. I just wanted to travel with just you. She twisted her body away fetchingly, averting her gaze with a mock bashfulness. Then looked back at him suddenly. In that brief interval, her expression shifted from the demeanor to cold as she delivered the final blow. I just. Lawrence had no reply, from frustration or embarrassment. It was doubtful that even he would that if he would even be able to remain standing. Wanting in any case to put some distance between himself and Hollow, he turned back to walk away before he was stopped by her call. Lawrence looked over his shoulder, wondering if she hadn't had her fill of tormenting, and saw Hollow smiling in the wagon bed. It was an exasperated sort of grin. He felt better as soon as he saw it. Honestly, he said with a sigh, giving her a rueful smile. I doubt I'll be exposed in 2 days. And do as you will, said Hollow with a yawn, and looked away as if to say, this conversation is over. Lawrence nodded, then trotted over to the shepherdess. He had the feeling he'd grown a bit closer to Hollow. Sorry to keep you waiting. Oh, not at all. So, how does 43 for the trip to Ruvendegen sound? With a bonus if the wolves attack and we make it through safely. Lawrence wondered if she would refuse, since the conversation with Hollow had wasted some time. The shepherdess's mouth hung open for a moment, but eventually Lawrence's words seemed to sink in, and she nodded hastily. Yes, please. It's a deal then, said Lawrence. He was about to extend his hand to shake, thereby sealing the contract, when he realized he hadn't asked the girl's name. Might I inquire what your name, miss? Oh, my apologies, said the girl. She seemed to not have realized that her hood was up, and now she hurried to pull it back. Lawrence had spent a long time being humbled in front of Hollow lately, and this was a sight for sore eyes. The face that emerged was a soft meek, not unlike the sheep she tended, with faded, obviously combed blonde hair tied back into a ponytail. She was slightly bedraggled and underfed, but her eyes were beautifully dark brown, and on the whole she gave off an honorably improvised impression. It's Nora Arendt. Again, I'm Kraft, Lawrence. I go by Lawrence in business. He took Nora's timidly offered hand and noticed that it, which was just slightly larger than Hollow's, was shaking a bit. Soon, though, she calmed herself and gripped Lawrence's hand lightly. Though her hand was small, its roughness marked her unmistakably as a shepherd. I'll be counting on you until Ruvendegen. My thanks, said Nora. Her smile was like soft summer grass. Lawrence had assumed that they would only be able to go as fast as the sheep could walk, but he was mistaken. The sheep were deceptively quick, and were climbing hills. The wagon was easily left behind, but their baying was a pastoral as ever, and the flock was like a white thread as it flowed quickly along the land. Nora, of course, kept up with no difficulty. At the moment, the sheep led the way, followed by Nora, who in turn was followed by Lawrence's wagon. Hey, Neck! Nora called out, and the bolt of black flame, the dark furred dog. And like a bolt of black flame, the dark furred dog came streaking back to his master, leaping in the air, barely able to wait for his next order. No sooner had the bell of Nora's staff rung than Anak charged off to the head of the group of sheep. Lawrence didn't know so much know much about shepherds, but he could tell that Nora's sheepdog handling was clearly excellent. The report that the rapport that she enjoyed with Anek was not gained in a single day. But Anek did not seem like a young dog. Nora couldn't have been more than 17 or 18 herself, so perhaps her parents had been shepherds and the sheepdog was her inheritance. His merchant curiosity was obvious. So, Nora. Yes? Have you been a shepherd for long? After hearing Lawrence's question, Nora gave her bell one long ring. Then slowed her pace and came up along the wagon's right side. Holo napped along the left side of the wagon. Just 4 years now. Since the profession required only that one memorize the hymn dance and phrase for blessing travelers who requested it, it was not uncommon to find even young shepherds with 10 years experience. Even without a proper staff or sheepdog, one could guide a flock with a piece of dead wood and still be a fine shepherd. So your sheepdog, Enek, I mean. You trained him yourself? No, I found him. It was an unusual answer. A competent sheepdog was a prized possession. It was unthinkable that a shepherd would just let one go. Lawrence could think of but one scenario. Its former master must have retired, leaving the dog to another. I became a shepherd after I found him. And before that? Lawrence asked without thinking. I helped at an almshouse attached to an abbey, and in return was allowed to live there. It wasn't very polite to pry in someone's past, but Nora answered smoothly, her feelings apparently unhurt. As a rare female shepherd, perhaps, she was used to such questions. She had once lived at the almshouse that suggested she had neither relatives nor inheritance. But now she was a fine shepherdess. The gods did bless some luck, it seems. When I was lying on the almshouse, I thought I would never leave such work. It was good fortune meeting Anek. The result of a daily prayer, surely. Yes, I can't help but think that I have God to thank for our meeting. Her bell rang out again, and Anek came streaking back to her. Back to her side. As the dry sound of Anek's footfalls reached Lawrence's ears, Hollow stirred, leaning slightly against the inside of the wagon. It seemed true, surely, that she could detect the approach of a wolf even while sleeping. I met him after the almshouse had lost its land to a swindling merchant, said Nora. It pained Lawrence to hear a fellow merchant's misdeeds, but the fact was, such things were common. When I found him, he was in a sad state, covered in wounds, continued Nora. From wolves? Well, it seemed to twitch. Perhaps she was only feigning sleep. No, it was brigands or mercenaries. There weren't wolves in the area. He had wandered about the base of the hill with his staff in his mouth. I see. Anek barked with pleasure at having his head petted. Undoubtedly, the dog hadn't been the only one wandering half dead at the foot of that hill. Most of those who were driven from a almshouse would have likely died from hunger. The bond between the girl and the dog had suffered great hardship together. The bond between the girl and the dog, they had suffered great hardship together, was no superficial thing. And the life of a shepherd was lonely and mean. Enoch was surely a welcome companion. Certainly better than the goods Lawrence found himself transporting. Horses, too, were poor conversationalists. Still, this is the first time I've had a shepherd offer their services as an escort. Hmm? Normally they'd refuse such a request, to say nothing of offering work, he said with a laugh. A flustered Nora looked hastily at the ground. Um, she began. What's that? I just wanted to talk to someone. Apparently, her way of clinging to her staff, which was taller than her, she was something of a habit. Still, Lawrence certainly understood her feelings. Outside of townspeople, those who did not have themselves stricken by by loneliness were few. Although, there is one other thing, the girl continued. Her demeanor brightened as she looked up. I'd like to become a dressmaker. Ah, so it's the guild's membership dues you need. Nora again seemed embarrassed by Lawrence's words. Not being a merchant, it appeared that she was unused to talk frank about money. They're high nearly everywhere, though not necessarily so in a new town. Oh, they're highly nearly everywhere, though not necessarily so in a new town. Really? Is it true? Her pretty brown eyes lit up with a frank anticipation that was entirely charming. It was the fondest wish of the most who lived by travel to settle in a town. Such a life was difficult even for an adult man, so the shepherdess must have felt the hardship still more keenly. Sometimes the guild dues are free if in newly found towns. Free? Whispered Nora with an countenance that betrayed her disbelief. After days of enduring Hollow's japes, seeing such a guiltless face put Lawrence's heart at ease. Hi, Pigeon. Tire. I'm a tire. If we meet any other merchant on the road, you should ask if they know about of any plans to found new towns in the area. If they know, they'll probably be happy to tell you. Nora nodded, her face shining with good cheer, as if she had been told the whereabouts of some grand treasure. If such news made her this happy, there was clearly value in telling her. And there was something about the girl that made him want to help her. Something clearly conveyed in the way she worked so hard with her slender arms. He found himself wishing that the wolf nearby was who could make a sly old merchant into her plaything with a single word, would take a page out of the shepherdess book. Oh, picking out electronics with older people is hell. I know that feeling. She'd be more likable in that way, he thought to himself after a moment's hesitation. Fewer towns have been founded recently, though, so you'd You'd do well to save steadily as you pray for good fortune, of course, said Lawrence. Yes, God can become angry if you rely on him too much. He thought the girl was serious, or so her joking tone took him by surprise. If Holo hadn't been sleeping behind him, he would have invited her to sit in the driver's seat. The moment the thought crossed his mind, though, Holo stirred. Lawrence spoke up hastily. Uh, so, um, so, speaking strictly from the standpoint of a merchant, do you think you might make more money escorting my kind like this than you do tending sheep? Surely the territory disputes are difficult. They are, said said Nora with a pained smile after a short pause. The safest places already have shepherds occupying them, so all there's left is Wolfstone Fields. Yes, wolves certainly can be troublesome. Ah, yes, wolves certainly can be troublesome. Ah! Lawrence felt a sudden pain in his buttocks and rose involuntarily from the driver's seat. Nora looked at him, puzzled, and he forced a smile before sitting down. Holo's sleep was evidently feigned. She had pinched him soundly. I'm sure the wolves are looking for food, but sometimes they take lives in the process. A safer place would be nice. Oh, a safer place would be nice, said Nora. Well, wolves are sly and treacherous creatures, said Lawrence, partially to get even with the pinch. If I speak ill of them, they may hear me, so I won't. Nora's humble manner was very charming, but Lawrence's reply, indeed, was mostly for the benefit of the wolf behind him. Still, he continued, if you've skill enough to defend your flock, even through wolf-infested fields, shouldn't your services be in greater demand, and your flock huge? No. It's only by the grace of God that I remain safe. I'm thankful to have any work at all. A huge flock, I just couldn't. Perhaps she was being modest, but it seemed as though there was something else behind her sad smile. Lawrence couldn't think of many possibilities. Was she dissatisfied with her employer? Although he knew it wasn't healthy, Lawrence's inquisitive nature voiced itself again. Well then, your employer has no eye for skill, he said. Mayhap 'tis time for a change. Shepherds, after all, were merchants too. It was only natural they should seek more favorable conditions. Oh, I couldn't possibly, gasped Nora, taken aback. It didn't seem like she was protesting out of fear of being hurt, either. She was sincere. My apologies. As a merchant, I'm always thinking of gains and losses. No, it's all right, said Nora, as if surprised by her own outspokenness. She began. Yes? I was wondering, do people change their employers often? It was a strange question. Well, yes, I think it's normal if one is unsatisfied with his own terms of employment. I see. When she talked like this, it sounded as if she was somehow dissatisfied. Yet Nora's total shock at the suggestion of changing those terms implied that she found the idea outrageous. If that was the case, one might deduce the identity of her employer. She had no relatives, so finding someone who would entrust his sheep to her would be difficult. Even the stoutest shepherd could expect to lose 2 sheep for every 10 they herded, and such sorry, and such was an acceptable loss. It would be normal for someone to worry about a seemingly frail girl being able to break even half the flock. Given that, whoever hired Nora had been someone motivated by charity rather than self-interest. In other words, if you don't mind my asking, is your employer by any chance the church? Nora's expression was so stunned that Lawrence was glad he'd seen it. How did you call it a merchant secret? Said Lawrence with a laugh. Olo stomped her foot lightly. Don't get cocky, she seemed to be saying. Well, yes, I received my flock from a priest of the church, but if it's the church, you should have no troubles with your work. You've found a good employer. Her employer was probably a priest connected with the almshouse she mentioned earlier. Personal connections were overwhelmingly more useful than either good fortune or strength. Yes, I was truly blessed, answered Nora with a smile. But Lawrence, whose livelihood was based on discerning the truth among flattery and lies, her lies were obviously her smile was obviously fake, false. As Nora turned aside to work with Enoch, Lawrence looked at Holo, who had been feigning sleep. Holo returned his gaze, and then she sniffed and turned away, shutting her eyes. If she'd spoken, she would likely have said something like, I have no sympathy at all. They've entrusted me with a flock, said Nora, and they've aided me in many other ways. She spoke as if to remind herself of the fact it was pitiable to see the reason for Nora's downcast expression was clear. The church was not employing her, it was watching her. Of course, at first, it probably had been out of charity that they'd entrusted her with a flock, which is precisely why she never thought of changing employers. Shepherds were often thought of being vaguely heretical. They weathered constant accusations of being the devil's hands. So it was far from strange that the ever so suspicious church would come to doubt a falsely accused woman who took such a job. All the more when she excelled at it. It was just more evidence of pagan magic. Even if the most obvious person would eventually notice such suspicion. The most oblivious person would eventually notice such suspicion. At the same time, the shepherdess's wages could not be high. She was worked hard for a meager pay. There would certainly not be enough to set any aside. Lawrence guessed that was the reason she offered her services as an escort. But Lawrence's merchant sense told him not to get more deeply involved in the issue. His curiosity was sated. Pursuing it any further would make him responsible for any further developments. I see. I dare say you need not worry about finding a different employer. Do you think so? Yes, the church is insistent on honorable poverty. Your pay will always be a bit low, but as long as God doesn't abandon us, the church will always exist. You'll not want for work. As long as you have work, you'll eat. Is that something to be thankful for? Having roused her concerns, and suggested changing employers, Lawrence knew that the hard fact was nobody would hire a shepherdess who'd caught the eye of the church. It wouldn't do for his actions to rob the lone girl of her livelihood. Lawrence wasn't lying in any case, and Nora seemed to accept it. She nodded several times slowly. "I suppose so," she agreed. It was true that having a job, any job, was good, but hope was important too. Lawrence cleared his throat and spoke as cheerfully as he could manage. "Anyway, I've many acquaintances in Ruvenhagen, so we'll try asking there after any merchants that might need protection from wolves. After all, God never said anything about having a nice little sideline, eh?" "Truly? Oh, thank you." Nora's face lit up so brilliantly that Lawrence couldn't help but be smitten. At such times, he was unable to muster his usual disdain for vice. The womanizing money changer in the poor town of Pazio. But Nora was not a town girl, nor was she an artisan girl, or a shop girl. She had a unique freshness to her. Part of it was a serious demeanor, like inherited from nuns at the almhouse, who had a slightly negative way of thinking, as if trying to suppress their feelings. Nora seemed to have taken that unpleasant tendency and replaced it with something else. It didn't take a womanizer to notice it. Lawrence was willing to bet that Enoch, who had now wagged his tail at Nora, was a male. Settling in the town of the is the dream of all who live by travel, after all. These words were still true. Nora nodded and raised her staff high. Her bell rang out, and Enoch bolted, turning the ship neatly along the road. They began to talk about food for traveling, becoming excited at the prospect. Stretching across wide plains, the road ahead was clear and easy. Shepherd's nights come early. They decide where to camp well before the sun set, and are already curled up and sleeping by the time its a red disk is low in the sky, and the peasants are heading home from the fields. They then rise once the sun is down and the roads are free of traffic, and they pass the night with their dogs watching over the flock. When dawn begins to break, shepherds sleep on alternate shifts with their dogs. There's little time for sleep in the life of a shepherd. One reason why is the profession is such a hard one. The life of a merchant who can count on good nights of sleep isn't easy by comparison. Hard work it is. Hard work this, Lawrence muttered to no one in particular as he lay in the wagon bed, holding a piece of dry meat to his mouth. It wasn't yet cold enough to bother with a fire. He glanced frequently at Nora's form, curled up like a stone by the roadside. He overheard the wagon bed, but she had begged off, saying this was how she has always slept, before laying down in the meager padding afforded by the grass. When he looked away from her, his eyes landed on Hollow, who was at his right. Finally free from the prying eyes of humans, she had her tail out and had begun grooming it. She never tires of that, thought Lawrence to himself, as he looked at her busily grooming Hollow. Her profile, the very image of seriousness. Suddenly she spoke quietly. Daily care of one's tail is important. For a moment, Lawrence didn't understand, but then he remembered what he just said a moment ago to himself. She was merely responding. He chuckled soundlessly, and Holo glanced at him, questioning a question in her eyes. "You meant the child," she said. "Her name's Nora Ardent," explained Lawrence, amused at Holo's derisive use of child to refer to the girl. Holo looked past Lawrence. Okame. Holo looked past Lawrence at Nora, then back just as Lawrence opened his mouth. She snatched the jerky from it. Lawrence was stunned into silence for a moment. When he came to his senses and tried to take the meat back, he received such an evil eye from Holo that he withdrew his hand. It wasn't necessarily because of his teasing, but she was clearly in a foul temper. She had gone out of her way to sit next to Lawrence as she groomed her tail, so presumably the object of her anger wasn't him. The source of her bad mood was obvious, really. "Look, I did ask you." It sounded like an excuse. Holo sniffed in irritation. "Can't even grow my tail in peace." "Why don't you do it in that wagon bed?" If you do it there, then what?" Lawrence pressed the suddenly silent Holo, who sneered at him, the jerky still in between her teeth. Evidently, she didn't want to discuss the matter. Lawrence wanted to know what she was going to say, but if he pushed any further, she would become genuinely angry. He looked away from Holo, whose wounded horse mood made her entirely too difficult to deal with, and put a leather flask filled with water to his lips. Lawrence just manages to stop thinking of her as the sun set. He considered starting a fire when Holo snapped at him. "You certainly seem to enjoy your little chat with her," she said. With Nora?" Holo still had the stolen jerky in her mouth and looked down at her tail, but her proud tail was obviously not what was on her mind. She wanted to talk. I didn't have any reason to refuse, did I? Apparently the indulgence of the wise wolf was not so broad as to forgive pleasant conversations with a hated shepherd. Holo had pretended to sleep the entire time. Nora had glanced at Holo and seemed inclined to engage the girl, who after all appeared to be roughly her age, in conversation, but had stopped at asking her name. If Holo had wanted to speak to Nora, there had been opportunities aplenty. "Also, I haven't spoken to a normal girl in some time," said Lawrence jokingly, as he looked back to Holo and faltered at what he saw. Holo's expression had completely changed, but it was nothing like the tears of jealous he'd hoped to see. She looked at him with nothing less than pity. "You couldn't even tell that she hated speaking with you." "Huh?" said Lawrence, casting a look back in Nora's direction, but stopped himself after a moment. As a merchant, he couldn't keep falling for the same trick twice. Pretending he hadn't looked back at all, he calmed himself and remembered the words of the minstrel he'd once heard. "If she fell in love with me at first sight, she'd miss the fun of falling in love with me over weeks and months, eh?" he said. Lawrence hadn't been convinced by his statement when he'd heard it, but saying it now lent a kind of conviction. Perhaps it was really Perhaps it really was more fun to fall in love gradually, rather than all at once, but apparently it was too much for Holo. Her mouth dropped open in shock and a piece of jerky fell on the floor. Have some wit for myself, eh? Said Lawrence. He'd said it to get a laugh out of Holo, but he was also half serious. As soon as she heard it, the wave that hit Holo became a tsunami on its way back, and she exploded with laughter. That's too good. Holo doubled over, clutching her stomach as she laughed, trying occasionally to stifle it. It only to dissolve into giggles yet again. Eventually, her face turned red, and she pitched forward into the pile of armor in the wagon bed, her pained laughter continuing. Lawrence joined in at first, but he saw more of Holo's reaction. His expression darkened. Her tail, fluffier than normal thanks to the recent grooming, slapped against the wagon bed, almost as if to begging for help. Okay, that's too much laughing. It was no longer funny. Yeah, gods, Lawrence muttered, taking another drink from the water flask, as if to wash down the irritation at being laughed at, as well as the embarrassment he now felt for quoting a minstrel. Of all things. Oh my, that was amusing. Are you quite done? Inquired Lawrence with a sigh, looking off to the sun that now sank into the horizon. He didn't much feel like looking at Holo, mistake or not. That was quite a trump card you had there. Out of the corner of his eye, Lawrence saw Holo nestled atop the pile of armor. Her laughter fatigued face angled toward him. It was as though she was exhausted after an all-out sprint. Well, as long as you're happy now. No matter how much she hated shepherds, Holo's foul temper had been a bit too foul. Lawrence felt. It was hard to imagine that she was actually jealous of the conversation he had with the girl. Nor was it true that she'd had absolutely no opportunity to groom her tail. For a moment, he wondered if it was simply shyness, but then he recalled their first meeting and decided it was entirely possible. Happy? The wolf ears of the individual in question, which had become uncovered when she collapsed in laughter, are now perked up, curiously as she regarded him with tear-blurred eyes, as though he had said something quite strange. You were in a foul temper earlier, because she couldn't tend your tail, you said. She seemed to remember something. Oh, quite, she said, her face calm. She hauled herself off the cargo, then plopped herself back down, wiping the tears from the corners of her eyes. Looking at her now, Lawrence thought she could not care less about whether or not she had sufficient opportunity for her tail grooming. Had it been just an excuse to vent her irritation about something else entirely? Can't be helped, she said. The tip of her tail slapped slightly against the floor of the wagon. Anyway, your trump card made me laugh so hard I turned giddy, said Holo, chuckling at the memory. She then looked outside the wagon. Is the child not cold, I wonder? Her observation brought Lawrence back to the present. The sun was mostly down. The sky was darkening blue. He had best build a fire. I'd heard that shepherds didn't generally build fires, though that was because they had to watch over and chase down their sheep, not out of uh, any particular resistance to cold. Lawrence mused on this as he looked at Nora, curled up into the grassy paltry cushion. He felt a sudden movement near his mouth and turned to find Holo thrusting a piece of jerky in his direction. Payment for your services as a jester. Only one piece of jerky for such laughter. Oh, you don't want it? Taunted Holo. Amused, despite his embarrassment, Lawrence decided to accept the offering. But his teeth closed on air. Holo had drawn her hand back at the last moment. The wise wolf snickered. Lawrence realized he was going up against a fool's errand. If she decided to be so childish, he could only ignore her. If he didn't build a fire soon, then they might... then they would all be eating dinner in the cold. Lawrence moved off the wagon, but Holo grabbed his sleeve and drew near. Laurence's heart skipped a beat. Her eyelashes still had a trace of tears, which caught the red light of the sun. I do think from time to time that some raw mutton would be nice. What say you? With the mournful bleating of the sheep echoing through the twilight air, Holo's words spoken through her ever-keen fangs could not have been entirely in jest. After all, she was a wolf. Lawrence patted Holo's head as if chiding her for making a bad joke, then hopped off the wagon. Holo's lip curled in a brief snarl, but she soon smiled slightly and passed Lawrence the bundle of straw, tinder, and firewood. Whew, that's a long chapter. Yes. Ah, well. Doesn't matter. That is another chapter in the world of Spice and Wolf. Huh. It's a good book. A lot less exciting than the last one, but still. These small moments give it a lot. Can you translate that sentence? I can't get the meaning out of it. Sorry. Oh. Ah. Yes, but it's a fun book. Well. Ah. Thank you. Well, the reading helps. Maybe one day I'll be able to just read sentences without constantly tripping over my own words. uh, we'll see how my improvement improves. Wait, what? No. How my reading improves over the next few weeks. But yeah, That's gonna be it for today. Let me quickly see. Yes. Tomorrow is gonna be Apex. It's gonna be you can see me suffer more in Apex. Hopefully get some kills. Yeah, of course. It was fun. Thank you for watching. I always enjoy these. I have nothing to say at the end of streams, but I still enjoy the end of streams. Oh well. Yes, thanks a lot for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Certainly did. Have a lovely evening. And I'll see you all tomorrow. Bye bye.